Hi, everybody. I'm Heather, the STEM Services Manager at NCRL, and today we are talking to Esker from the Methow Valley about the salmon in the Pacific Northwest. So I am going to ask Esker a series of questions, and she's going to answer them and fill them in and talk about the fun stuff that she does regarding salmon projects in our communities. So I guess the first question I'll start with is what are the species of salmon that we can find in the Pacific Northwest? And can you give us a defining factor for each species that we might see?
Okay, so hi. So the salmon, we can use our hand. I go CCCPS, so that's how I remember it. Chinook, chum, coho, pink, and sockeye. So those are the 5 salmon in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm going to also review some of their more common names. So the Chinook is called the king, the chum, the dog, the coho, the silver, the pink, the humpback, and the sockeye, the red. So that's how I remember them. I have some pictures if you want to see those. That might give a little detail as to why they are different and what distinguishes them from the way they look. Also, they're distinguished as different species from their life habits and their life cycle, and we'll be going over that in a little bit. So I wanted to show you this. So here is the king salmon. Can you see that? And it's the largest.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the largest of the salmon. It can go up to 40 pounds, grow up to 40 pounds. This is the chum. And the coho, the silver. And the hunchback. And the sockeye. Okay. And the hunchback being the pink. So those are the pictures of the different salmon. Yeah. And so I think once we get into the life cycle that you'll see the differences between the species. Yeah. So those are the 5 species of the Pacific Northwest.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. And so I hear a lot about salmon in our region, and I'm in Wenatchee, but wherever I go, I'm always hearing about salmon. We have all these awesome hatcheries regarding salmon. So I was wondering if you could just give us a little information about why they are so important in multiple ways in our communities.
Yeah, so lots of layers. I've broken it down to culturally and environmentally. Culturally, humans have been feeding on salmon for thousands of years along the coastal areas, and it has allowed many groups to survive, really. It's been also part of their culture. They honor the salmon. They have the first salmon ceremony. They have story of salmon. So it's very important. Economically, today, it's important to many groups. But culturally, very important. Environmentally, the salmon is considered a keystone species. The description of a keystone species would be where other species have to depend on the salmon in their ecosystem. They have to depend on the salmon for both for survival and reproduction. So very, very important. There are different references that specify how many species, but it's over 100 species of animals, birds, and including reptiles and amphibians, all depend on the salmon for their survival in the Pacific Northwest. So very, very important. Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of species that do survive on salmon or survive because of the salmon?
Absolutely. Bear, bear very closely, the feed on the salmon, of course, in the spring and the summer. The orcas, the orca whales, otter. As far as birds, eagle, terns, and so those are some examples. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. So the next question, we will talk about the salmon life cycle. So what is the salmon life cycle? Does it differ between species? Kind of like go through birth to adult and all the stages that take place.
Yeah. So I have another picture I'm going to show you because I think it shows it well. Do you see the whole thing?
You have to bring it up a little bit.
Okay. So we have egg and then alevin fry that go into
Can you put it up just a little bit more? I can see where that's perfect. There we go.
okay. Yep. And then the eggs, the alevin, the fry, and then you have sort of the par there, and we'll talk about each of these stages. The smolt, and then the adults, and then the adults go back to what's called the natal water, the water where they were born, in the rivers where they were born. So it's definitely a cycle that you'll see. And then we'll talk about each of these stages. So the first stage are the eggs, and the eggs are laid by the female in what's called a redd, R-E-D-D. And the eggs, excuse me, the eggs are laid by the female, and they're fertilized by the male, and then the redd, which is the nest, and you'll see it's a little depression in the gravel, and the eggs are laid. The eggs can be up to 6,000 to 6,500 eggs in a redd or a nest. And that usually occurs in the fall, and they'll stay in that area for about a month, up through overwintering in that area until they hatch. And so that's the first phase. And then when they hatch, they have the little hatchlings are called alevin. And the alevin are swimming. They're very, very tiny. They stay around the nest, and they have this yolk sac right there that they use for their food. And so they'll be eating from that yolk sac for a month plus until they mature and the yolk sac is eaten up, basically. And then they are called fry. And so the little fry are about 1 inch. So again, very small, and they stay around their nesting area still initially. They have, with the fry, interestingly, they'll go up to the surface. They have a little air sac. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And the air sac, they'll swallow in air, and it goes into this little air sac, and it allows them to be buoyant, so they float. So they'll be in that area, and this is where you start seeing differences in species. But they'll be in the area of the nesting area when they're small, and they'll usually either stay in that area or, for example, with the sockeye go from the river to a lake, and then the times that they stay in those areas vary between species. So it could be anywhere from 5 months to the sockeye 2 years as fry. And then as they mature, and the par are different coloration, but as they mature and they start deciding that they're going to move toward that ocean, it's called smolting. And smolts, these are smolts. And so these smolts will eat along the way, as the fry did, on small fish or small algae, and they survive that way. And so the smolts are moving down the river toward the ocean. And as they do this, they're growing also. So initially, when they're pretty small, the river will take them with it. And then as they get a little bigger, they'll start swimming actively toward that ocean. And they'll end up in what's called an estuary, which is where you'll have the salt and the fresh water as they transition from freshwater to saltwater physiologically. And then they'll go to the ocean. And again, you'll see a wide variation between species as to how long they stay in the ocean, where they stay in the ocean. For example, the king salmon, which is the Chinook, they will stay in the ocean up to 8 years as they grow. And as we noted, that they can grow up to 40 pounds. So they're big fish. And they may travel thousands of miles. And then there are other salmon that stay more coastal. And so as they're growing, they'll be in the area, like we said, anywhere from 18 months usually to about 8 years. They'll come back into the rivers, trying to get back to where they were born. And at that point, they will travel. They'll slow down in their feeding. And when they get to these rivers, they'll actually stop feeding prior to spawning. And as they come into the river, they usually are there for a few weeks and before spawning. Yeah, so we right now in the Methow have the spring Chinook coming in, or the Chinook, and so they start being seen in the Methow River around mid-May as they're migrating in. And so that really almost completes the cycle. So they come back, they lay their eggs, the female lays their eggs again, and fertilize, covers them up, and then the salmon will die. And they may lay 1 red up to 4 reds, and then they will die and provide nutrition for the environment, the trees and that sort, and other animals. So that is the life cycle of the salmon.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So we probably covered a little bit of this during that, but if you could talk about what salmon need to survive and kind of compare it to what humans need.
Yeah, so there's some really fun projects too you can do with this. There are 2 that I chose to talk about. The beautiful basics, which is what do we need as humans to survive, and to make a list. You can also compare that, as we'll do, to the salmon, and I'll point out 4 of the beautiful basics. And so you can make these lists. So you start thinking, what does it take to allow us to survive and other species to survive? The 4 that I chose are food, water, space, and shelter. And so the second project, which is a lot of fun, and you can expand on these, is to draw a floor plan of your own home and to discuss what your rooms provide you, or maybe what the roof provides you and the walls. So you'll have your food obtained from different areas, your water, your shelter from your roof, etc., to keep you warm in the winter and cooler in the summer. And then you have, of course, space, and you need that space. And so comparing that to the salmon, when we look, for example, at the fry, as they stay in their areas for up to 2 years, they need space in order to look for their food. They also need to be able to remove themselves from maybe a fast-flowing river or a predator, and so they need that space. Obviously, food, they need to grow, and they need fresh, clean water that's running, has a lot of oxygen in it, and they need shelter. And when we look at where salmon live, you can really look around their environment at the trees and the roots and the logs and the sticks and the boulders that provide them shelter in their environment. So those are sort of the basics that the salmon need. And you can look at that all along their life cycle and think about that with those 4 basics. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this kind of goes back to the life cycle a little bit, but if we could think about just like one individual salmon making its way from an egg all the way to the ocean and back, considering this one individual survives all the way back, what are some barriers that it would overcome to get all the way back here, and how difficult is that? How many salmon even make it back?
So if you have from this nest of 1,000, maybe 10 salmon will make it back. And so as they're, you have to think of the predators that are eating all these salmons, because we talked about them being a keystone species and important to these different predators that eat them. But also all along the way, from being very small, going down the river, working through systems that have been dammed in other areas that are difficult to reach the ocean, and returning from the ocean, there are some obstacles there for the salmon. As they enter the ocean area, the predators such as orcas, we talked about, and different fish that will eat them, the environment that they're in, are the estuaries healthy, the water. So we're going back to those four basics really in a way. So you're looking at, is the water healthy, whether it be freshwater, saltwater, and then as they're looking for their food sources, others are looking for them. So there are different types of obstacles in that way. And then there are also the man-made obstacles that occur on the rivers, such as the dams.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Cool. I was wondering, I know you've been reading out of a book, so I was wondering if you could tell us what book that, so share maybe a couple of your favorites.
Yes. So the first book I was showing you was from Bobby Kalman. He has a series of books on the life cycle. So this is the life cycle of the salmon, but he has life cycle of bat, beaver, beetle, bird, butterfly, crayfish, flower, and on and on and on. So this is a really, really nice series, and lots of great pictures. I've sort of categorized the books that I have as more information gathering, scientific for the first category, curricula, which can include, there's one here that I really liked. This one was from Alaska, but this is Sam the Salmon. And this combines different programs that include literature, science, of course, mathematics, economics, art, and it has different projects in it. And then the third category, so I have the first being the more factual, second curriculum, and then the third category is the story and the storytelling of the first salmon ceremony and Salmon Boy, and all these great stories that have been passed down through the years. So let me show you some of those. I have those right here. For example, this is a story by Donna Joe, and this is Salmon Boy. I don't know if you can see that. And this is it's just a wonderful story with great illustrations. This is by Bruce McMillan, and it talks about a young man who he and his family go to Kodiak Island in Alaska, and they fish for salmon every summer. And then it shows pictures of he and his family catching salmon. I don't know if you can see that. So that's a fun one. So there are all sorts of books like this. This was a really beautiful book on the first salmon ceremony. And this, the illustrations are what it would have been maybe, are illustrating what this first salmon ceremony may have been 1,000 years ago. And so it has pictures from that. So, or illustrations, I should say. So these are some of the books that I've enjoyed. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. It's really interesting. And then the last question I have for you is: are there any salmon crafts that you specifically like, or that maybe we can look forward to doing once our library worlds go back to normal and we're allowed to be in the library and doing crafts and doing STEM projects? I was wondering if you could share with us about that.
Yeah, so I did gather, these were from a program that we were going to do at the library. These are from the salmon life cycle, and we make up cards and we shuffle them, and then we can talk about where they may fit in the life cycle. So that was something that was a lot of fun. More origami.
Oh, very fun.
Moving salmon.
Can you send me how to make that little origami salmon? That's super cool to do.
Yes. This is great too, and very easy to make. I'm going to go over here for a minute and just grab two others.
Okay.
well, 3 others. So this was from another project, and it's cut art. And so you can make puzzles of the salmon and piece them together, draw on them, and very similar to the, again, Pacific Northwest art, traditional art. Sockeye, we talk wind socks of sockeye.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was another one. So these are the eyes of the sockeye. And then the one that I really liked, I sort of made this one. I don't know. This is a headband.
Oh, fun. Oh, it's so pretty. I really like it.
And what I envision, I haven't done this yet, is to have everyone make a headband and swim upriver.
That's very fun. Yeah, I would love to get those craft project ideas from you and the instructions, and then I could maybe make some at home and do it as part of my DIY STEM from home projects.
Oh, good. Yeah, definitely. I'll send you some stuff. So, yeah.
Well, thank you again so much. This has been a really interesting and entertaining interview.
Well, thank you.